A pie left on a porch. A lantern burning past midnight in a house where the windows had been dark for 2 years. A man standing at the edge of a yard he had crossed 100 times before, suddenly unable to explain to himself why his boots had stopped moving. A woman with her sleeves rolled past the elbow and her hair coming loose from its pins, not noticing him standing there, or perhaps noticing and not finding it worth interrupting her work. These are the things I want you to hold in your mind. Not the drama of it, not the crisis or the fever charts or the quarantine notices nailed to the doors of half the town. Those things happened, and we will get to them. But first, I want you to understand that the whole of this story, the love and the courage and the long, slow revision of a man's most settled assumptions, the whole of it balanced on something as small as a woman leaving a pie on a porch without knocking. That is what this story is about. The enormous weight of small gestures and the particular blindness of a person who has decided, quietly, privately, in the locked room at the back of their own heart, that such gestures are no longer meant for them. His name was Caleb Morrow. He was 44 years old in the autumn of 1884, which was not old, though he had arranged his life as if it were. He ran the farrier operation on the east side of Harlan Creek, Montana, a town of 412 souls situated in a valley between two mountain ranges that had no interest in the town's opinion of itself. Caleb was good at his work. He was known for his patience with difficult horses, and his honesty in his pricing, and his general willingness to do what he said he would do when he said he would do it. These are not small virtues. In a place like Harlan Creek in the year 1884, they were the kind of virtues that built a reputation over decades and held it against weather. He was also known, in the way that small towns know things about their own people, as the man whose wife had died of a fever 3 winters prior, and who had not, in the time since, given any indication that he intended to be anything other than a man whose wife had died of a fever 3 winters prior. He ate, he worked, he spoke when spoken to. He attended church with a regularity that was more habitual than devotional. He kept his house in a state of maintenance that was thorough and joyless. He had a dog named Hector, a large red-brown hound of uncertain ancestry and absolute certainty of opinion, who slept by the stove and regarded the world with the weary authority of a retired judge. Hector had been Clara's dog first. This was a fact Caleb had never stated aloud and never would. It was simply one of the arrangements of his life, like the way he still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning before catching himself, or the way he still bought more flour than one person needed, because Clara had believed in keeping a full pantry against hard times. He was not miserable. That is important to say clearly and without apology. He was not a man drowning in grief. The grief had passed through him, the way hard seasons pass, and what it had left behind was not despair, but a kind of careful quietness, a settled quality to his days that he had come to mistake for peace. He was wrong. He did not know he was wrong. This is not a flaw unique to Caleb Morrow. It is, I would argue, one of the most human errors a person can make, to confuse the absence of pain with the presence of enough. He had stopped expecting anything and called it acceptance. He had stopped wanting and called it maturity. He had drawn a circle around the life he had and decided it was the whole of the map. Hector knew better. Hector had known better for months before any of this began, but we will come to that. The woman's name was Nora Voss. She had come to Harlan Creek in the spring of 1883, which was a year and a half before the winter that would change everything. And in that year and a half she had become, in the town's collective estimation, a figure of some complexity. She was 31. She was a widow twice over, her first husband taken by a mining accident in Colorado when she was 23, her second by a bad winter in Wyoming when she was 28. And this fact preceded her in conversation the way a strong smell precedes an open door. They called her the woman who had buried 2 husbands. They did not mean it cruelly. They meant it the way small towns mean most things about women who have outlived their men, with a mixture of sympathy and superstition and a faint, unexamined unease, as if survival itself were a quality worth watching. Nora had come to Harlan Creek because her second husband's cousin had offered her a position as the town's attending nurse, there being no doctor within 40 miles, and the previous nurse having left to be married in Billings. She had accepted the position with the directness that characterized everything she did. She had arrived on a Tuesday, assessed the medical supplies in the small room behind the general store that served as the town's clinic, written a list of what was needed, presented the list to the town council, and had the supplies ordered before the end of the week. She was not rude about this. She was simply clear. She had a way of speaking that stripped the unnecessary from a sentence the way a good knife strips bark from a branch. And this quality, which ought to have been recognized as efficiency and competence, was instead described by some members of the community as abruptness, or as the particular kind of directness that made certain people, meaning certain men, feel they were being assessed rather than addressed. She was not abrupt, she was honest. These are different things, and the difference matters, and Harlan Creek would eventually learn it, though not before the diphtheria came and made the lesson impossible to ignore. Caleb Morrow's first encounter with Nora Voss was unremarkable. It was a Tuesday in late October of 1883, and he had brought his neighbor's youngest child to the clinic with a hand badly cut from a slip of a wood-splitting axe. Nora had cleaned and bound the wound with a speed and gentleness that the child, who had been screaming on the walk over, had found so disarming that she stopped crying and watched with open curiosity. Nora had talked to her the whole time, not the bright, falsely cheerful talk that adults sometimes perform for children, but actual conversation, asking her opinion on the color of the bandaging cloth and whether she thought the scar would be impressive enough to show at school. The child had decided it would be. Caleb had paid the fee, thanked Nora, and walked home. He had thought about the way she talked to the child for approximately half the walk home, and then he had thought about the fence post on the south pasture that needed replacing, and that had been the end of it. Or so he would have told you. Hector, who had been waiting at the gate when they returned, had looked at Caleb with an expression of mild expectation that Caleb had chosen not to interpret. The weeks that followed were ordinary. The months that followed were ordinary. And then, in the way of small towns and small distances, ordinary became routine, and routine became ritual, and ritual became the thing that holds a life together without anyone deciding to build it. Every Thursday, Nora came to the farrier's yard. Not for the horses, she did not own a horse, but because the route from the clinic to the general store ran past Caleb's gate, and because somewhere in the second month she had mentioned that she found the smell of the forge calming, which she acknowledged was a peculiar thing to find calming, and which Caleb had acknowledged without comment, and which had apparently been enough of a welcome to make it a standing arrangement. He did not invite her to stop. She did not ask permission. She simply stopped, leaned on the fence post nearest the gate, and watched him work for 10 or 15 minutes, and they talked about whatever was in front of them. The weather, the condition of the roads, the news from Billings, the particular stubbornness of the gray gelding belonging to the minister, who could not be shod without a full hour of preliminary conversation. Caleb had not, in 3 years of widowhood, talked to anyone for 10 or 15 minutes at a time about nothing in particular. He had not realized this was a thing he missed. He told himself he was simply being neighborly. He told himself this with the careful diligence of a man who suspects he is lying to himself and would prefer not to examine the suspicion too closely. Hector had taken to sitting beside the gate on Thursday afternoons. Caleb told himself this was coincidence. There is a moment in almost every story I have told, and I have told a great many, enough to have noticed the pattern, where the thing that is going to happen becomes visible to everyone except the person it is going to happen to. It is not that the person is foolish. It is that they have arranged their interior life around a particular conclusion, and that conclusion has become load-bearing, and they can feel, somewhere below conscious thought, that questioning it would require them to rebuild something they have already finished building. Caleb Morrow was in this position by December of 1883. The Thursday visits had become, in the months since October, something he found himself anticipating without admitting he was anticipating it. He had begun, without deciding to save things for Thursday. A piece of news, an observation about the horses, a question about medicine that he had no practical reason to ask. He was not aware he was doing this. He was aware that Thursdays were a better day than most other days, and he had filed this awareness in the part of himself he did not examine and left it there. Nora, for her part, was perfectly aware of what was happening. This was not arrogance on her part. It was the same perceptiveness that made her a good nurse, the ability to observe what was actually present rather than what was supposed to be present. She had watched Caleb Morrow for 2 months, and she had seen a man of genuine decency and quiet warmth, who had decided, for reasons that were understandable and wrong, that he was finished. She found this both sad and, in a way she would not have admitted to most people, familiar. She had made a version of the same decision after her second husband died. She had been talked out of it by nobody in particular, and by time and by the specific evidence of her own continuing interest in the world. She was willing to wait for Caleb to talk himself out of it too. She was patient. She was also, she had decided, going to make herself as visible as possible in the meantime, because patience was not the same as passivity, and she had not survived 2 winters of grief by being passive about anything. The pie appeared in mid-December. It was a dried apple pie, because that was what could be made in December in Montana, and it appeared on Caleb's porch on a Thursday morning before he had come out to start the forge. And there was no note with it because Nora had decided a note would make it into a thing that required a response, and she did not want to require a response. She wanted to give him something with no obligation attached, because she suspected that obligation was one of the things that made him careful. He found it when he came out at 6 in the morning. He stood on the porch in the cold for a full minute, holding the pie, and then he looked at Hector, who had come out with him and was sitting on the porch boards with the expression of a creature who had expected exactly this outcome. Caleb brought the pie inside. He did not eat any of it until Thursday, when Nora came by in the afternoon, and then he offered her a slice, and she said she had already had some, and he said, "You didn't have to do that," and she said, "I know." And that was the entire conversation about the pie. It was not the entire meaning of the pie. He thought about the pie for the remainder of December. He thought about it in the way he thought about things that didn't fit the arrangement of his life, carefully, at a distance, turning it over without committing to a conclusion. He thought about it while he shod horses. He thought about it while he ate supper alone. He thought about it while Hector watched him from beside the stove with the patient, deliberate gaze of an animal who had somewhere to be and was waiting for a human to catch up. He did not reach a conclusion. He would not reach a conclusion for a long time yet. And then January came, and the diphtheria came with it, and the question of conclusions was temporarily rendered irrelevant by the more immediate question of survival. The first case appeared on the 6th of January. A child named Thomas Alderman, 7 years old, the son of the mill operator, came to Nora's clinic with a sore throat and a low fever that she recognized before the second examination was finished. She had seen diphtheria twice before, once in Colorado and once in Wyoming, and she knew its particular signature, the membrane forming at the back of the throat, the bark of the cough. The way the fever sat differently than an ordinary fever, with a heaviness to it that experienced nurses learned to read the way experienced farmers read weather. She sent Thomas home with his mother and instructions, and she sent a message to the town council that evening, and she spent that night writing out what she knew and what would need to happen and what the town had and did not have in terms of supplies. And by morning she had a plan. The council received the plan with the mixture of concern and resistance that plans of necessary disruption usually receive. There would need to be quarantine. There would need to be a list of households to be watched. There would need to be a dedicated space for the sick, separate from the clinic, because the clinic was too small and too central. There would need to be people willing to nurse, which meant people willing to enter houses where diphtheria was present, which meant people willing to risk their own lives. The council agreed to the quarantine notices. They were less certain about the rest. Nora was entirely certain about the rest. She did not argue. She simply began. She converted the back room of the church, with the minister's permission, which he gave without hesitation, into a ward. She identified the households at risk and organized a schedule of visits. She wrote out instructions for family members on how to care for the sick without spreading the illness further, and she went door to door delivering them, and she answered every question she was asked with the same plain clarity she brought to everything. She was not frightened, or if she was, she had placed the fear somewhere it could not interfere with the work. This was not courage in the dramatic sense. It was the practical courage of a person who has decided what matters and acts accordingly. Caleb heard about the diphtheria on the morning of the 7th, from the blacksmith 2 doors down, who had heard it from the miller, who had heard it from his wife. He heard about Nora's plan from the same chain of sources, with the addition of several opinions about whether a woman of her history was the right person to be making such plans, which opinions he found himself disliking with an intensity that surprised him. He went to the church that afternoon. He did not have a reason prepared. He found Nora moving cots with the minister's wife and a girl of about 16 who was helping because her mother had sent her to help, and she had arrived terrified and been put immediately to work, which had resolved the terror into purpose. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment. Nora looked up. She said, "Can you build?" And he said, "Yes." and she said, "I need 2 more cots and a partition wall at the far end to separate the worst cases." And he said, "I'll have them by tomorrow." And she said, "Thank you," and went back to what she was doing. He had them there by that evening. He did not go home afterward. He asked what else needed doing. She told him. He did it. This became, over the following 6 weeks, the pattern of his days. He came in the mornings before the forge and again in the evenings after, and he did whatever was needed that did not require nursing, building, carrying, fetching, fixing, keeping the fire going through the night, when the cases were worst and the temperature outside dropped to the kind of cold that had opinions about the living. He did not think about the pie. He did not think about Thursdays. He thought about the work, and about the people in the cots, and about Nora moving between them with the particular efficiency of someone who has made peace with the fact that they cannot save everyone, and has decided this is not a reason to save fewer. He watched her work. He watched her the way he had not watched another person in 3 years, with full attention, without the protective distance he had kept between himself and the world since Clara died. He was not aware he was doing this. Hector, who had taken to accompanying him to the church in the evenings and sleeping near the door, was aware of it. Hector was aware of most things before Caleb was. By the end of the 2nd week of January, there were 11 cases in the ward, and 4 more being managed in homes across town. Nora had not slept more than 4 hours on any given night. She had eaten when someone brought her food, which was often Caleb, who had begun, without discussing it, to bring a covered pot of something from his own stove each evening, on the theory that a person doing what she was doing needed to eat and might forget to. She did not tell him this was unnecessary. She ate what he brought and said thank you, and went back to work. The town was watching all of this with the focused attention that communities bring to crises, which is to say they were watching the diphtheria, and they were watching Nora, and they were watching Caleb. And the more perceptive among them were watching the space between Caleb and Nora, with the particular interest of people who can see something forming that the participants cannot yet see themselves. The blunt shopkeeper, a woman named Mrs. Halverson, who had been in Harlan Creek since before it had a proper name, said to her husband one evening that Caleb Morrow had more color in his face than she had seen in 3 years, and that she did not think it was entirely attributable to the cold. Her husband said he hadn't noticed. Mrs. Halverson said she knew he hadn't noticed. The minister, who was a cautious man by temperament, said to his wife that he found the situation between the farrier and the nurse to be admirable in its dedication to community service. His wife said yes, she supposed that was one way to describe it. The person who was least subtle about the whole matter was a man named Gerald Pruitt, who was 38, prosperous, recently widowed himself, and who had been paying calls on Nora since the previous autumn with the earnest and entirely decent intention of courtship. Gerald Pruitt was not a bad man. He was, in fact, a good man, steady, solvent, approved by the community, the kind of man that a woman in Nora's position was supposed to find sensible and appealing. He brought her good firewood and reliable conversation and a respectful interest in her opinions that stopped just short of actually being changed by them. Nora liked Gerald Pruitt. She had no intention of marrying him, and she suspected he knew this, and she respected the fact that he had not stopped being kind about it. During the diphtheria weeks, Gerald Pruitt came to the church ward twice, looked at the situation with visible discomfort, said that he admired what Nora was doing, and that he hoped she was taking care of herself, and left. He was not a coward. He was simply a man who had calculated the risk, and the calculation had come out differently than it had for Nora. Caleb had not calculated the risk. He had simply come, because Nora had asked if he could build, and he had said yes. And everything after that had followed from the yes, the way things do when you stop negotiating with yourself and start moving. By the 3rd week of January, the ward held 14 patients. 3 of them were children. One of them, a girl of 4 named Elsa Brandt, had been there for 9 days and was at the point in the illness that Nora described to Caleb one evening when he had stayed late to keep the fire, as the part where you find out. He asked what you found out. She said whether the body decides to keep fighting or whether it decides it has had enough. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Does it help, talking to them?" She said she believed it did. She said she believed the sound of a calm voice was a kind of medicine. Not because it cured anything, but because it told the body it was not alone, and she thought the body made different decisions when it knew it was not alone. He thought about this for a long time. He thought about it while he fed the fire. He thought about it while he listened to the particular silence of the ward at 2 in the morning. which was a different silence than the silence of his house, because it was full of the sounds of breathing, which was evidence of continuing. He had been sitting in the silence of his house for 3 years and calling it peace. He was beginning to understand what it had actually been. Elsa Brandt turned the corner on the 23rd of January. Nora came out of the back of the ward and told Caleb, who was sitting on a bench near the door with Hector asleep across his boots. And her voice was steady, and her face was tired, and there was something in her eyes that was not quite crying, but was the thing that lives next door to it. He stood up. He said, "That's good news." She said, "Yes, it is." They stood there for a moment in the particular way of two people who are aware that the moment calls for something and are not sure what form it should take. Then Nora sat down on the bench, and Caleb sat back down beside her, and Hector, without opening his eyes, shifted so that he was leaning against both of them, which Caleb chose not to comment on. And they sat there in the warmth of the church stove until Nora said she should check on the others, and she got up and went back into the ward. And Caleb sat there for another few minutes with his hand resting on Hector's back, and the particular feeling of a man who has been handed something and is not yet sure what to do with it. He was sure it was something. He had not been sure anything was something for 3 years. This, it turned out, was the beginning of the end of his certainty that the map he had drawn was the whole of the territory. Now I want to pause here for just a moment, because I know some of you are listening to this while you are driving or doing the dishes or lying in the dark trying to quiet your mind. And I want to say, wherever you are right now, thank you for being here. This kind of story is the reason I do this. If it is sitting with you, if you are feeling what I hope you are feeling, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. Leave a comment, it genuinely means something to me to know. And I want you to stay with me, because Caleb Morrow is about to figure something out, slowly, as was his way, and with the full deliberate weight of a man who does not do anything without understanding why. The diphtheria broke in the first week of February. Not all at once, it never does, but the new cases stopped coming, and the existing cases began, one by one, to turn the corner that Elsa Brandt had turned, and by the 14th of February there were 4 patients left in the ward, and all 4 of them were improving. The town exhaled. The quarantine notices came down from the doors. The mill reopened, the school reopened. Mrs. Halverson reopened her shop an hour earlier than usual, which was her version of celebration. And the town, which had spent 6 weeks watching Nora Voss move through its sick and its frightened with a competence and a steadiness that had made the thing survivable, revised its opinion of her with the totality that communities reserve for people who have proven something under pressure. They no longer called her the woman who had buried 2 husbands. They called her instead the woman who had kept the whole town from burying more. This was not a small revision. In Harlan Creek, in 1884, it was everything. Nora received this revised opinion with the same equanimity she brought to most things. She thanked people when they thanked her. She accepted the food and the firewood and the small gifts that appeared on her porch in the weeks following, because she understood that people needed to give something back after surviving something, and receiving gracefully was its own form of service. She went back to her regular work at the clinic. She went back to her Thursday route past the farrier's gate. She was, as she had been before the diphtheria, patient. She was also, if she was honest with herself, beginning to wonder if patient had a limit. Caleb, meanwhile, was engaged in the particular internal process that was his version of coming to terms with something. He had been doing it since the night Elsa Brandt turned the corner. He did it while he shod horses. He did it while he ate supper. He did it while Hector watched him from beside the stove with an expression that had evolved from mild expectation to something closer to exasperation. He thought about Clara. He thought about her the way he had learned to think about her, not with the sharp grief of the first year, but with the warm and settled regard of a man who had loved someone thoroughly and lost them and carried them forward as a presence rather than an absence. He thought about what Clara would have said about all of this. Clara had been a direct person. She had been, in this respect, not entirely unlike Nora Voss, which was a comparison Caleb had made once and then immediately buried under a great deal of other thoughts, because it had felt like a thing he was not ready to look at directly. He looked at it now. He thought Clara would have told him, with the particular affectionate impatience she had reserved for his slower deliberations, that he was being foolish. He thought she would have told him that the point of having loved someone well was not to use it as a reason to stop. He thought she would have said this while doing something else entirely, the way she had always delivered her most important observations. sideways, in passing, as if the truth were too obvious to require ceremony. He thought. She would have liked Nora, he thought. That is not a small thing to think, he thought. I have been measuring the wrong thing. He did not know yet exactly what he meant by this. He was getting there. He was the kind of man who needed to get all the way there before he moved. He got there on a Thursday in late February. Nora had come by in the afternoon as she always did, and they had talked about the horses and the weather and the fact that the alderman boy, Thomas, the first diphtheria case, had come into the clinic that morning with a splinter in his thumb and had shown it to Nora with the pride of a person presenting evidence of an interesting life. Nora had removed the splinter and told him it was an impressive one, and Thomas had left satisfied. Caleb had laughed at this. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and he had heard it come out of him and registered it as unfamiliar, and then registered the unfamiliarity as information. Nora had smiled at the laugh, the real smile, the full one. He had seen it before. She had a polite smile she used for general purposes, and a real smile that was different in the way that a lit window is different from a painted one, and he had, in the months of Thursdays, become quietly expert at distinguishing between them. She had the real one now, he said, without entirely planning to say it, that he was glad she had stayed in Harlan Creek. She looked at him. She said, "Are you?" He said, "Yes." He said it was a better town for having her in it. She said, "That's a kind thing to say, Caleb." He said, "I don't mean it as a kind thing. I mean it as a true thing." There was a silence, not an uncomfortable one, the kind of silence that a true thing makes when it lands in the right place. Then Nora said, "I have been operating under a set of assumptions." He waited. She said, "I assumed you were a man who needed a great deal of time to come to a conclusion, and I decided that was all right, because the conclusion seemed worth waiting for." She said this in the same plain, direct way she said everything, looking at him over the fence post with the same steadiness she brought to difficult diagnoses. And Caleb stood there in the cold air of the February afternoon and felt the last of the arrangement he had built around his life shift on its foundations. He said, "I have been operating under some assumptions of my own." She said, "I know." He said, "They may have been wrong." She said, "I know that too." He said, "I would like to." And then he stopped, because he was still getting there, and she waited, because she was patient. And Hector, who had been sitting beside the gate with the expression of a creature who had been waiting for this moment for approximately 4 months, stood up and walked to the gate and sat down directly between them and looked at Caleb with an expression that could only be described as instructive. Caleb looked at Hector. He looked at Nora. He said, "I would like to call on you, if that would be agreeable to you." Nora said, "Caleb, I have been leaving pies on your porch since December." He said, "I know." She said, "Yes, it would be agreeable to me." She pushed off the fence post and continued on her way to the general store, and Caleb stood at the gate for a moment in the cold, and Hector sat beside him and looked up at him with the expression of a creature who had done his part and expected acknowledgement. Caleb put his hand on Hector's head. He said, "All right." Hector appeared satisfied. The calling began the following Sunday. It was formal at first, in the way of the time and the place. Caleb at Nora's door at the agreed hour, hat in hand, the conversation careful and deliberate in the way that things are when they matter enough to handle carefully. But the formality did not last long, because Nora was not a formal person, and Caleb, it turned out, was only formal when he was uncertain, and the uncertainty was resolving itself with each visit into something that felt, to his considerable surprise, like ease. They talked about everything. They talked about medicine and horses and the mountains and the particular character of winters in Montana versus winters in Colorado and Wyoming, which Nora had opinions about. They talked about Clara, once, on an evening in March when the snow was coming down outside Nora's window, and Caleb had said, without entirely planning to, that Clara would have liked her, and Nora had been quiet for a moment, and then said that she thought she would have liked Clara too, and that she was sorry she had not had the chance. This was, Caleb thought, exactly the right thing to say. He had not expected the exactly right thing. He had been braced for something more careful, more diplomatic, the way people were usually careful and diplomatic around the subject of a dead wife. Nora was not careful and diplomatic in the way that avoided things. She was careful and diplomatic in the way that went directly to the center of them. He found this, to his own ongoing surprise, to be the thing he had not known he was looking for. Gerald Pruitt came to see Caleb in April. He came in the early morning, before the forge was properly going, and he was direct about his purpose, which Caleb appreciated. He said he understood how things stood, and he wanted Caleb to know he bore him no ill will. He said Nora was a remarkable woman, and that whoever she chose was a fortunate man. He said this without apparent bitterness, which was either genuine or an extremely convincing performance of genuine. And Caleb chose to take it at face value because it was the kind of thing he would have wanted to say in the same circumstances, and he respected that Gerald had said it. He thanked Gerald. Gerald shook his hand and left. Mrs. Halverson, who had seen Gerald arrive and depart from the window of her shop across the street, told her husband that evening that it was all settled then. Her husband said he still hadn't noticed anything. Mrs. Halverson said she knew. The proposal came in May, when the first real warmth had returned to the valley and the mountains had shed enough of their snow to show the dark rock underneath. Caleb had thought about how to do it for approximately 6 weeks, which was longer than it needed to be, and exactly as long as he needed it to be, because he was the kind of man who did not do things until he understood why he was doing them and could say so plainly. He had prepared what he wanted to say. He had revised it. He had said parts of it aloud in the empty farrier's yard at 5 in the morning, which Hector had observed without judgment. He went to Nora's door on a Sunday afternoon in May, with his hat in his hands and the mountains visible behind him in the clear light, and he said, "I have been thinking about what I said in February, that I had been operating under some assumptions that were wrong." She said she remembered. He said, "The assumption was that certain things had a limit, that a person was given a certain amount of the kind of happiness that comes from another person, and that when it was gone, the account was closed." He said he had believed this not because he had examined it and found it true, but because it was easier than the alternative, which was to admit that the account was still open and that he had simply been afraid to make a withdrawal. He said he was no longer afraid, he said. Or rather, he said, "I am still afraid, but I have decided that is not a sufficient reason." He said he would like to marry her if she was willing, and that he was aware she had been waiting longer than was reasonable for him to arrive at this point, and that he was grateful for the patience. Nora looked at him for a moment with the expression she used when she was making an assessment. Then she said, "I decided in January," he said. "January," she said, "the night Elsa Brandt turned the corner. You sat on that bench and you didn't say anything and you didn't leave, and that was enough for me." He thought about that night. He thought about Hector leaning against both of them. He said, "That was enough." She said, "That was everything." He said, "You could have told me." She said, "I could have. I thought it would be better if you got there yourself." He said, "It took 4 more months." She said, "Yes." She said, "But you got there." He said, "Yes." He said, "I know." She said, "Yes." They were married in June, in the church that had been a ward in January, which the minister found poetically appropriate and said so at some length during the ceremony. The town came, all 412 of them, or close enough that the distinction did not matter. "Mrs. Halverson cried, which she denied afterward. The alderman boy, Thomas, sat in the front row and showed his splinter scar to the child next to him throughout the ceremony. Gerald Pruitt attended and was gracious. Hector was not technically invited but was present, sitting outside the open church doors with the expression of a creature attending an event he had personally organized. The years that followed were ordinary in the best sense of the word. Caleb kept the farrier operation. Nora kept the clinic. They had 2 children, a girl and a boy. And the girl had Nora's directness and the boy had Caleb's deliberateness, and the combination made for a household of considerable interest. They disagreed about small things, the proper temperature for coffee, the best route to Billings, whether Hector was allowed on the furniture, which was a question Hector had resolved for himself long before it was put to a vote. They agreed about everything that mattered. On the evening of their 5th anniversary, sitting on the porch in the late summer light, Nora said, "You didn't have to build those cots in one day, you know." Caleb said, "I know." She looked at him. He looked at her. It was the same exchange they had had about the pie 5 years before, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so, because some things do not require saying. The mountains did what they always did. They held the valley and the town and the small particular life of 2 people who had found their way to each other through grief and diphtheria and the slow, deliberate courage of a man who had needed to understand something before he could do it, and who had, eventually, understood it. "Now, I want to talk to you directly for a moment," because this story is about something I have seen in every version of itself I have ever told, and I want to name it plainly. Caleb Morrow's error was not that he grieved. Grief is not an error. Grief is the price of love, and it is a fair price, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not loved sufficiently. His error was the arithmetic. He had taken the grief and the loss and the real, true fact that he had loved Clara and lost her, and he had used those facts to construct an equation that did not follow from them. He had concluded that the account was closed, that the love he had given and received was a finite resource, a fixed quantity, and that spending it once meant it was spent. This felt like wisdom to him. It felt like the mature acceptance of a man who has been through something real and come out the other side. It was not wisdom. It was a very convincing disguise that fear puts on when it wants to be left alone. Here is what I have noticed. Across all the stories I have told about people who loved and lost and loved again, the ones who found their way back to something were not the ones who stopped grieving fastest. They were the ones who eventually understood that love is not a subtraction problem. You do not have less of it because you spent some. You do not dishonor the love you gave by giving it again. The capacity for it does not diminish with use. If anything, and I have seen this enough times to say it with some confidence, if anything, it grows. The love you gave the first time teaches you something about how to give it. The loss teaches you something about what it is worth. And if you are very lucky and very brave and willing to sit on a bench in a church ward at 2 in the morning without saying anything and without leaving, you find that the account was never closed. You find it was waiting. Don't let the arithmetic stop you. Don't let the fear dress itself up as wisdom and sit in your best chair and tell you the map is finished. The map is not finished. I say this to you not as a judgment but as an encouragement, because I know some of you listening to this are sitting in your own version of Caleb's house, in your own version of the quiet you have mistaken for peace. I know because I have told enough of these stories to know that the people who find them are the people who need to hear them. You are not finished. The account is open, and somewhere, I suspect, there is a pie on your porch that you have not yet decided what to do with. Thank you for spending this time with me. I mean that in the way that Caleb meant things, not as a kind thing, but as a true thing. Your attention is not nothing. It is, in fact, the whole reason I am here. If this story sat with you, if it gave you something to carry into the rest of your day, I hope you will share it with someone who might need it too. And until next time, be decent, be patient, be brave enough to revise your assumptions. The mountains will hold the rest. I'll see you down the road.